Hello my friends, welcome to my corner. It was almost 20 years ago that the Turkish author Orhan Pamuk was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature. Let me read you the citation. The Nobel Prize in Literature 2006 was awarded to Orhan Pamuk, who in the quest for the melancholic soul of his native city has discovered new symbols for the clash and interlacing of cultures. I remember when that Nobel Prize was awarded because it had just been a couple of years before that I had decided to start reading at least one book by each of the Nobel laureates. Now back then, when the time came to read Pamuk, I decided to go with The White Castle, and that was for two reasons. The first one, I'm going to be perfectly honest with you, was because it was a brief novel. Okay, this is one of his shortest works. And the other reason, I would say equally importantly, is that it deals with a doppelganger kind of theme. And as you may know, I am absolutely in love with that kind of theme in novels. So I was like, okay, it's a win-win situation. Now here's what happened. I believe that I did not really understand that novel, and as a result, I did not really enjoy it. So this time when it came to making a video about Pamuk, I decided to go with a different work instead of rereading The White Castle. I had many options. There was one that I was really excited about, The New Life, because it's about somebody who reads a book and it changes completely this person's life. But then I read reviews about it and that people were not that enthusiastic about that particular novel. So I thought, okay, let's go for the big one, okay? And to me, the big one reading about it was Benim, adım, Kırmızı, which means, of course, my name is red. This is one of the novels by Pamuk that many people consider to be his masterpiece, or at least one of the books that led to his being awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature. So this novel was published in the year 1998. It is Pamuk's fifth novel. Okay, the one that I showed you before, The White Castle, this one is his second novel, but it's the first one that is available in English. So the one that was published before this is the only novel by him that has not, at least not yet, been translated into English. The one that we are looking at right now, is 413 pages in length, and the action is divided into 59 brief chapters. This is a polyphonic, multi-perspective novel. So you get very different types of narrators, most of whom are directly related or directly concerned with the events that are narrated, but also some secondary characters, and some of them, the narrators, very interesting. For example, a gold coin, a horse, a tree, okay, and many of these are painted. They are representations of these things, not a real horse, but a representation of a horse. Satan is also a narrator, death, okay? And here's the thing, listen to how the novel begins, okay? Because this is one novel that kind of, grabs your attention from the very beginning. It's gripping. And chapter 1, which is titled, I Am a Corpse, begins like this. I am nothing but a corpse now, a body at the bottom of a well. Though I drew my last breath long ago and my heart has stopped beating, no one, apart from that vile murderer, knows what's happened to me. And I mean, with a beginning like that, how can you help, just, I couldn't stop reading after that. It's one of those novels, a few cases that this happens, that from the very first sentences, I was like, wow, I really want to know how this story continues and what is going to happen. So what is My Name is Red about? Here's the thing. The Sultan has commissioned a group of artists, these are painters, miniaturists, to put together a book, illustrate a book that reflects his glory. Problem: illustration goes against the teachings of Islam, because the only one who creates is God himself, Allah himself, right? So there we have the conflict. And the actual story begins when one of the miniaturists is murdered. Maybe because of this conflict, maybe not. That is one of the things that we are going to try to find out as we read. The guy is known as Elegant Effendi, and most of the clues as to who the murderer of this guy is are to be found in the art that was produced. So it's a really interesting premise. Tightly connected to that, so we have that thread, right, about the miniaturist who was murdered. And very closely related to that, we have another story, and this is the story of Shekur. She is a woman with two sons who are named Orhan and Şevket, just as in real life, Orhan Pamuk and his brother Şevket. And this woman's husband has gone to war, but he has not returned. So there's a guy named Black who wants to marry her. That is the other thread that we find in the novel. In other words, you could say that this novel intertwines a narrative thread that deals with art and another one that deals with desire. That is the word that I'm going to use for the purposes of describing the story right here. Now, there are several subgenres at play, if you ask me, in My Name is Red. So this is obviously, right, at the most basic, quote-unquote, level, a historical novel. It is set in the 16th century, in the year 1591, to be absolutely precise. But this is also a mystery novel, okay? Because the first thing that we find out, as I told you, and as we heard with the first lines of the novel, is that there has been a murder. And the thing is, as we read, the text leads us to believe that in due time, the identity of the murderer is going to be revealed. Right? So that's the other part, another subgenre right there. And let's not forget Şeku's story, right? Her story is that of a woman who's being courted while her husband is away at war. She's hoping that this guy will return. So I would not go as far as to say that this is a romance or a love story, but it is definitely a novel of manners in the sense that it tells us a little bit about how that aspect works. This idea waiting for this guy to see if he's alive, and this idea of whether you should get a divorce or not and marry another person or not. Now, the way that I wanted to approach this novel, because it could be a pretty complex one, is through three themes that I wanted to emphasize, and that's the way that we're going to go about it. The first one is the role of art, okay, especially when considered in conflict with religion, or at least with the interpretation of certain religious teachings. So that is probably theme number one. But if we go deeper, the issue at hand here with this idea, right, still with the idea of the role of art, is the good old tradition-modernity dichotomy. Okay, so it's a representation also of that, and that is a crucial theme in Turkish history, and as a result, of course, also in Turkish literature. Actually, you can see it in another classic of Turkish literature that I have talked about before. This is not the first time that we approach Turkish literature. So if you're interested in my review on Ahmet Hamdi Tanpınar's The Time Regulation Institute, that's another very important work, admired, by the way, by Orhan Pamuk, in which you can see this idea, tradition, modernity, the clash between those two things. So My Name is Red kind of takes up that clash, that dichotomy right there, those two concepts. So that was theme number one. The second one, I would say that just as important is the notion of style, okay? And here by style, we mean the personal type of style, a personal thing, kind of like a signature that you may put to a work of art. Is personal style an asset or a flaw? That is one question that this novel is going to raise. Should the artist sign his or her work, or should they work for a higher purpose? And this is kind of difficult, at least for me, because the kind of culture that I come from, to us, it's like art equals self-expression, right? That's the way. The art is how you express yourself. It's you put your soul into the painting, you put your heart on the page when you're writing or anything like that. So it's kind of like a given. But to me, this novel asked me, okay, consider other views, okay? Maybe art, self-expression, that's not the only thing that art can be, right? So that's one thing that I feel that this novel helped me to consider. So at the center of this idea, right, the signature, what we have, I think, is art and the problem of vanity. I think generally speaking, this idea of a personal style, of a signature, is something that we associate primarily as a product of the Renaissance, because you have that focus on the individual, the focus on man as opposed to the divine, maybe egocentrism even. Now, there was something that I was reminded of when I was reading this novel. It's a personal experience that I wanted to share with you that I think illustrates this idea of style, personal style, signature, producing art for another purpose. When I was in high school, I was like 14 years old, I went with one of my history classes to the city of La Plata. Okay, so as you may know, I was born and raised in Buenos Aires, Argentina. La Plata is just about an hour away from Buenos Aires. And we were talking about architecture, so we visited the La Plata Cathedral. And at one point, I remember we were looking at the dome, right? We're inside the cathedral, and we're looking at the dome, and you can see that up there, way up there, in the dome, there are sculptures, right? And the teacher told us those are 12 sculptures, one for each of the 12 apostles. But they are up there in a place where nobody can get close to, nobody can really admire the detail and the artistry right there, because, she said, the artist produced these sculptures so that they were meant to be seen and appreciated only by God. I was like, wow. You know, like, I would not be able to do something like that. If I spend time working on a piece of art, I want other people to see it and to admire it, right? I mean, you can call me selfish, but that's my approach. To do something like that, to work, you know, to spend your time on something and then put it up there where it cannot be seen by other people, that's a different level, right? It's a different kind of approach. Same thing with writing, right? If I spend, I don't know, 2-3 years of my life producing a novel, I'm not going to say, okay, I'm just going to put it in the drawer so that God can admire it. I'll be like, you know, I want other people to read it, you know. So maybe I'm not as advanced as other artists, but I think that is what is at play here with this idea of the personal style or the signature. So that's theme number 2. Now, the third one, representation. Okay, we're looking at things and the symbols that represent them. That is basically, at the basic level, what art or visual art is. So the artist senses something and then presents his or her interpretation of that thing, which may be an object or not, to other people, or to God, in this case that we were talking about before. But I wanted to raise a question that I feel that the novel addresses, or at least that the novel inspired in me. And I think this is it, you know. At this point, and even at the point when the novel was, so the story is set in the novel, so we're talking, you know, 16th century, is art a representation of reality, or is it a representation of previous art? You know, I'm talking about something that is self-reflective, that is self-referential. You can think about a golden age when you had the beginning of art, you know, the first person who decided, okay, this cow, you know, let's produce an artistic representation of that cow. But after you have that art, after that, art is also based on previous art. So you could say maybe it's a mix of both, right? But it's something to consider, you know. Is a representation of a horse really a representation of a horse, or a reflection of the representation of horses that has been produced for years and years and years? That is another theme that recurs through this novel. And of course, you can take it to the realm of literature, right? This is something that is you know, really for those of us who write, we think about this all the time. Writing is based on previous writing, you know, not so much on real life. Sometimes it's based on something that was written before, and you're working based on that. It's just very difficult to produce an original work of art, or even something like an original action. Many of the things that we do in life, we have seen them before in a movie or read about them in a book. So it's not something original that we're producing. I always give this example, you know, think about your first kiss. How did you know what to do? You had seen hundreds of kisses in movies, right? So it's not something original anymore. You're just kind of replicating something that happened before. And you can expand that to any kind of aspect of life. You know, it's like going on a date. What do people do? You go for coffee. You go for I don't know, a movie, dinner and a movie, and it's always kind of the same thing. Nobody says, oh, I don't know, let's go to the supermarket and let's look at the products as if we were in a museum. Nobody does that, right? So why does everybody always do the same thing? Because it's kind of like the thing that's done, right? What we have seen or what we have read about in articles or what we have seen in a movie. So that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about here. By the way, if you try that thing with the supermarket and it works, give me credit for it, okay? And if it doesn't work, don't blame me for it. It's not my fault. But anyway, the issue of representation here is what I'm talking about, and we have to add to that the issue of reference, especially within the context of art. So that is the other thing that I wanted to highlight. Now, I cannot talk about My Name is Red without mentioning the notion of digression, and I would say this is probably the mode of the novel. Digression is something that abounds in this novel. Now, I want to say not the kind of digression that you find, for example, in Tristram Shandy. Okay, that is the epitome of digression. But here you do have a story, you know, but the digression is present there. You're going to find that much of what you read about in this novel, you're going to think this could have been left out. And that is obvious, okay? The author is not trying to hide that. It's obvious that a lot that we read about here could have been left out, but that is part of the beauty of the novel, that there are all these tangents and all these stories, most importantly, within the story, just as you may find them in the 1001 Nights video from Jorge's Corner, of course, many videos about it if you're interested, or in Don Quixote, right? Video from Jorge's Corner coming up sometime, okay? I can't promise when, but at one point you can be sure that if I can, I am going to speak about Don Quixote. So in a murder mystery, let's think about it this way, you expect the style and the narration to be more direct, okay? I want to find out who it was that committed the crime. But in this case, what we have here is kind of like a postmodern approach. We have a literary work that plays with the tropes of the mystery novels or other popular subgenres. And that's why you have the connection with, for example, Borges or with Calvino that many critics have made. As a matter of fact, I think it was John Updike. Yes, he was. It's back here. So he compares Pamuk to Calvino and Borges, philosophical artificers of boxes within boxes, you know? So it's very apt comparison right there. And I would also add Umberto Eco. Okay, so you have that kind of approach right here with My Name is Red. Now, before we conclude, I wanted to share with you some quotes, in particular about this idea, this notion of art and its purpose, because I think that way you'll get a sense of the style of Pamuk in this novel, and also an idea of the kind of philosophical discussion that goes on in this novel. Okay, so for the first one, we're going to go to page number 58, and this is what it says. It is indeed important that a painting, through its beauty, summon us toward life's abundance, toward compassion, toward respect for the colors of the realm which God created, and towards reflection and faith. The identity of the miniaturist is not important. So as I was telling you, that idea of the personal signature is something that is considered right here. For the next one, we're going to go to page 263. And it says right here, this is an artist speaking. What exposes us is not the subject which others have commissioned from us. These are always the same anyway, but the hidden sensibilities we include in the painting as we render that subject. When a painter renders the fury and speed of a horse, he doesn't paint his own fury and speed. By trying to make the perfect horse, he reveals his love for the richness of this world and its creator, displaying the colors of a passion for life. Only that and nothing more. So here we have maybe that idea of producing art for a higher type of purpose. And then for the last quote, which is one of my favorites actually, we're going to go to page number 368. And this is what it says right here. An artist's skill depends on carefully attending to the beauty of the present moment, taking everything down to the minutest details seriously, while at the same time stepping back from the world which takes itself too seriously, and as if looking into a mirror, allowing for the distance and eloquence of a jest. Okay, allowing for the distance and the eloquence of a jest because the world takes itself too seriously. And the reason, one of the many reasons why I like that quote so much, is because I believe you can take that quote as a kind of introduction to this whole novel itself. So if you decide to read My Name is Red and it's your first time, I would suggest considering that, you know, before you read this novel, because that, I believe, is one of the good ways to approach it in the first place. Bottom line, My Name is Red is truly impressive, and this is coming from somebody who is, as I have said before in other videos, not really that much of a big fan of historical fiction. Okay, it's not my cup of tea, but I read this one and I enjoyed it very much. This is a very engaging story about the last days of representative painting in this culture, and it also explores the roles that art may play in our lives. But at the same time, it's a really thought-provoking allegory of the clash between modernity and tradition, right, as I was saying before. So that is most of what you're going to find in this novel, but there's also much more than that. Now, based on this reading experience that I had this time of Orhan Pamuk, which by the way was much better for me than my experience with The White Castle, there are 3 adjectives that I would use to describe Pamuk. I would say he is erudite, he is meticulous, and last but not least, very importantly, probably most importantly for me, he is playful. So that's the way that I would describe him. Do you have any questions, comments, recommendations, recipes? Please let me know. I'm always here, always listening. Those were my 2 cents on My Name is Red by Orhan Pamuk. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for stopping by, and have a wonderful day.